A few months back, we took a look at one of the more peculiar and obscure parts to Sega's history, the Sega Star Kids Challenge. This TV show came about due to a lack of budget at Sega to market their products, caused in part to a major overspend to really push their systems into people's homes during the 1991 fiscal year. Partnering with Universal Studios Orlando and Universal Studios Hollywood, a charity special TV show was created to help promote Sega's products, as well as seeing famous child and teenage celebrities from the time competing to win money for a chosen charity. It was supposed to be a one-off show, but much to Universal Studios' amazement, the show was actually quite the hit, and talks soon began to commission a follow-up for the next year. There was just one problem. Sega, who had financed the bulk of the first show, didn't want to do it. So with Sega out of the show, Universal turned to another company who were more than happy to be involved. And that company was Sega's most direct rival, Nintendo. Sega were probably not too happy about that. As with the previous Sega Star Kids Challenge, Universal Studios brought in a number of different sponsors and filled the show with celebrities and mascot characters who would perform a series of challenges in their theme parks in order to raise money for charity. This is the 1993 Star Kids Challenge, sponsored by Nintendo. So before we get into this, just think about this for a moment. Sega couldn't afford to advertise on multiple TV shows that their target demographics were watching, so they made their own show and got those TV stars to appear on it, and then with their respected audiences, they would now be watching Sega's show and looking at their products. And now, Nintendo was doing it, on the show that Sega came up with. As with the previous year's event, filming would begin in April 1993 and would air a few months later. So with Sega gone, who else would take part in the event? This time around there would only be 28 contestants spread out over 4 teams, alongside 6 hosts and a huge range of mascot characters who would regularly pop up during the show in the form of cheerleading, and in some cases some really odd segments. We'll get onto this in a few moments. Some contestants of the previous year's events returned for this event, including Jenna Von Oy and Jonathan Taylor Thomas, but the show also attracted new talent including Shirok Lofton, who was Jake Sisko in Deep Space Nine, Michael Fisher from Roseanne, and Michael Cade from California Dreams. Unfortunately, Saved by the Bell's Mark Paul Gosselaar, who in the previous year's event gained some notoriety for how seriously he took the competition, didn't return. The hosts were also changed. This time the show was presented by 6 hosts, including Downtown Julie Brown, Joey Lawrence, who was actually a contestant in the previous year's event and also appeared at the Sonic 2 launch party, Dawn Lewis, Alfonso Ribeiro, and the late Macho Man Randy Savage. Oh yeah! Yes, the Macho Man was indeed a host, and he acts and behaves exactly as you'd expect him to.
Beautiful day here in Hollywood, and what a beautiful day for a track meet. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Wait a minute. What about? Hey, you're forgetting me. What about me?
A big change from the previous year was that the team names were dropped, probably because last year nobody could pronounce the fabulous the purple team. This year's teams were named after colours. You had the green, blue, yellow and red teams. A moment's silence for the purple team. And if you don't get this joke, you really need to watch the video on the Sega Star Kids Challenge. With the contestants and hosts hired and ready, what actually happened? Well, as before, Universal Studios was transformed into a series of physical events for the show, and the events were as follows. Oh, wait, sorry, no, we can't talk about the events just yet, because right at the very start of the show, it did something really odd, which it didn't do on the previous year's show. You see, after the show introduced the hosts, the contestants, and even after the sponsors appeared in a brief break, including Nintendo, the show decided that the next best thing to do was show this guy. So for those of you who don't live in America, or who just don't know who that character is, you might be thinking right now, oh, that's just an eagle mascot, what's so bad about him? Well, that, my friends, is Eddie the Eagle, and he's about to tell all the people watching what to do if they find a loaded gun.
Now you've got to know what to do if you see a gun. Huh? Right. Now the first thing you do if you see a gun is stop. Huh? Absolutely. The next thing to remember is don't touch.
Holy shit. Yes, that's right, my friends. The very first thing this show does is a gun safety PSA. Just wow. So with the gun safety PSA out of the way, let's talk about the actual events that were on the show. The first event was named Virtual Reality! And the contestants had to enter a 90s era virtual reality game and try to, I'm just going to quote the show here, catch bubblegum to score points and try to shoot bubblegum out of their opponent's hand. The team with the most points were the winners. The next event was a returning event from the previous year, Know the Ropes. Contestants had to use ropes to cross the Universal Studios Miami Vice Lake, as well as take a zip line to destroy a floating target and a few other physical activities involving ropes. The third event was another returning event called The Web, but it was changed slightly in that now contestants had to carry large pieces of a jigsaw puzzle through the web mesh and then complete the puzzle in the fastest time. The fourth event was really strange. They called it Scramble, but it looks and plays exactly like Dodgeball. I don't really know what else to say. It's dodgeball with a funny looking ball. The next event was the Fitness Relay Race. Much like the previous year's event, it was an obstacle course type race. Moving on. The event Tour de Huffy was an obstacle course, but this time on a bike. So we're over halfway through the show and you might be thinking, where's Nintendo? Aren't they sponsors of the event? Well, yes, and here they are! Nintendo got their own round, and it's exactly the same as the Sonic round from the previous years. Only this time, the contestants have to play a stage of Star Fox, and the team who beats the stage with the most points is crowned the winner. The next event was the Wall Climb, which featured in the previous year's show, but this time they added a cargo net at the beginning, which the contestants had to crawl under before they could climb the wall. And the final event was Tug of War. Yes, the lame climax to the previous year's event returned. Only if you can believe it, it was actually even more dull than the previous year's event. If you remember, the losing team in the previous years gave up before they were pulled into a pool of water. Only this time, there were 2 pools of water, and the winner was decided when the flag was pulled outside of the opponent team's pool. But due to the distance between the teams and the pools of water, pulling the opponents into the water was completely impossible. No one was going to get soaked on this, regardless as to if they gave up or not. So if you're watching this footage, you might be thinking, so the yellow team must have won overall, because they're in the final event in the Tug of War, and they won. Well, no. The winner of the competition was the blue team, because for some reason, the way the competition worked this year was that teams were not scored based on how many rounds they won, but on a point system, and the blue team completely dominated the competition, so they were declared the winners even before the second to last round. The green team did so badly that they completely lost. The yellow and the red teams, though, they somehow finished the competition with the exact same number of points, so they were made to play Tug of War in order to decide which team would come second. Another change from the previous year was that there was no prize giving ceremony, meaning everyone who was actually watching this show at home had no idea how much money each charity had won. As with the previous year's event, the show was part a charity event and part a promotional event, so it was full of mascot costumes for each of the companies that sponsored it. So how well was the representation? Well, just before cutting to commercial breaks, the hosts would announce who the show was sponsored by. Companies included Borden's Cracker Jacks, Lifesavers, and Pepsi. But the strangest supporter of the show was the United States Postal Service. Yeah, that's an interesting one. But of course, Nintendo were one of the primary sponsors, so the Nintendo logo would appear at each commercial break, and they even got a round themed on them, which saw the contestants playing on the Super Nintendo with huge Nintendo banners all around them. This entire segment was basically an advert for the Super Nintendo and Star Fox. But the biggest sponsor was Slim Jim. Unlike Sega, Nintendo was not the primary sponsor this time. That honour went to Slim Jim, and if you don't know who they are, they make beef jerky. Yes, a beef jerky company sponsored a physical activities charity event. So aside from the logos and commercials, what about the mascots? As with the previous year, the show was absolutely packed with them. Universal Studios had a number of monsters from their Universal Monsters family. Harry from Harry and the Hendersons is also in a number of scenes, as well as Looney Lime, who was the mascot for Lifesavers Candy. Even Rocky and Bullwinkle also make a brief cameo appearance. There's also a few other mascots who I just have no idea who these are. Like these weird cow things that are behind the Macho Man. Oh, and of course there was also that. And yes, there's also Mario. Unlike Sonic in the previous year, Mario doesn't get that great representation in this TV special. He appears in a number of scenes, but he's barely seen. You really have to be looking for him. At the start, he's really well hidden behind all the contestants. It's only during the Star Fox round that he appears clearly, and Jesus Christ, that's terrifying. I've not really talked about Mario mascot costumes before, but this one just gives me the creeps. I think it's because he has an oversized plastic head and tiny looking arms. The performer doesn't look like he can move around very well at all. I know it's one of the first Mario mascot costumes, but it really is poorly designed. Maybe we should look at Mario mascot costumes sometime. So other than the events themselves, what else actually happened during the show? Because last time there were some small skits with the contestants. Well, this time there was barely anything. Most of the time it was just banter between the hosts and some of the other contestants who would say how honoured they were to be involved with the show. Other than that, very little happened. The show also lacked any merchandise other than the t-shirts worn by the contestants. And unlike the Sega Challenge where some contestants wore Sonic branded caps, this year the caps were just plain white. In terms of the show's legacy, how successful was this? Well, with the previous year's event, we have a clear source. Tom Kalinske said in the Console Wars book that he was pleased with how the show turned out, both in terms of a TV special and for Sega as a promotional item. But for this year's show, how did that turn out? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anything. Nobody from either of the companies involved, be it Nintendo, Pepsi, or even the US Postal Service, have actually gone on record to say how they felt the show went. But one big clue in terms of the legacy of the show comes from within the show itself. Right before the credits roll, a number of celebrities, including the hosts, talk about how much they really enjoyed their time and how they hope they'll see everybody again next year.
Alfonso, thanks so much, buddy. I had a great time working for a great cause, and I'll see you guys next year.
Well, we'll see you next time when Slim Jim presents the Star Kid Challenge.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Except that he wouldn't. From what I can find out, the show was cancelled and it didn't return in 1994. And from what I can see, it never returned again. And speaking personally, compared to the original Star Kids Challenge, this event just didn't feel as good or anywhere near as entertaining. Aside from the fact most of the events were just recycled events from the previous year, for some reason it just doesn't feel as fun to watch. So I'm not surprised that it didn't return for a third run. And that's pretty much everything I can say about this very strange event. It's a really odd footnote in gaming history due to the fact that Sega invented this TV show and Nintendo would then take part in the following year's show, which was near identical in every way. But it's fun to view these events, not only as a time capsule to what and who was popular during the early 90s, but also as a time capsule to entertainment in general. So out of the two events, which one was your favourite? The Sega or the Nintendo one? And what do you think of the Mario mascot costume that they used in this show? Do you find it as creepy and as weird looking as I do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. See you next time! Hey guys, thanks for checking out the video. If you liked it, don't forget to smash that like button. And if you'd like to be notified on future videos, don't forget to click the subscribe and bell notification button. I'd just like to take this time to give a very special thanks to my kind Patreon donators. They include Karim Tasuli, Kenny Newbury, Mark Davies, Nathan Stevenson, Mr. Retro Geek, Niemand, Rusty Coolpix, Spookberry, Stalin Usher 2, Stephen Temple, and The Wax. If you'd like to join them and receive early access to videos, as well as other thank you perks, please use the links in the video description. Otherwise, just please share the video on Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit, which is also a huge help. But most of all, just thank you for taking the time out to enjoy the work I produce. It really does mean the world to me. Thank you.